Hello, right, we are fantastic. That's one job out of the way there. So I'm just going to keep an eye out for Gemma in case she can join us. In the interim, we're just going to get started. So welcome today to the Craft Distilling Expo and the Environmental Packaging Panel, or Eco Panel, Packaging Panel, it could be known. I'm joined today by a great selection of people. So we're going to start off with some introduction. Oh, I think I've got a delay, so please ignore me. Let's have a little look here. So we're going to start off with Nolan.
How's it going?
Oh, bear with me. I'm just having a few technical problems here. If we sit tight for a second. Oh, maybe it's because it's on there. Can I just check? Can anybody else hear the talking over, or is that just me?
I can hear it through your speakers.
Yeah, same with me.
Yeah.
Oh, why is it doing that? Bear with me 2 seconds, guys. Sorry. Didn't do this before. I think I know what's wrong. Bear with me. Okay, let's try getting rid of that. Right. I might. If you guys just carry on talking amongst yourselves for a second, I'm just going to consult my technical help. Okay. If you could just introduce yourselves first. If we start off with you, Nolan, and then Anika, and then Rosie, and then John, and that will just give me 2 minutes to look at what's going on at my end.
That works out fine. Let's do that. So my name's Nolan. I'm head of emerging brands at Allied Glass. So we are a British glass manufacturer and decorating business. We're based up in Yorkshire. We always joke I'm the only part of the business that isn't from Yorkshire because I'm Canadian. Adopted Yorkshire, and we work across the board. So we work with a lot of emerging or craft brands, from the smallest of distilleries and people's kitchens to some of the biggest distilleries in the UK and the world. We have a wide spectrum, and we're known very much for growing with brands. So I'm really excited to be asked to chat about the subject. I watched the pre-recorded video, and there's some really interesting chats in there. There's a couple times I almost wanted to jump in, but obviously I couldn't because it was a video. So I'm looking forward to chatting about it today.
Excellent. Well, I'm Anika from Thunderflower Gin in Devon. We're one of those very small craft gin brands, very, very small. So looking forward to answering any questions today.
Try meeting myself. I'm Rosie, head of MPD at Atom Brands, and been with Atom for about 8 years, so a long time, touched a lot of different stuff.
And I'm John Norton. I'm technical director at Allied Glass, working with Nolan. Been at Allied for 14 years. Prior to that was 10 years at a competitor, so almost 25 years in glass for my sins. I've spent my career working on the glass melting side and the environmental and sustainability side. So hopefully can answer a few questions today.
And I think just kind of hop in on that. I know that there is a couple points that were discussed in the pre-recorded chat, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get John involved. That obviously I have a very commercial outlook on it and a customer-centric outlook, whereas John and what all glass manufacturers are doing right now is obviously trying to better our sustainability credentials. And John's been working on that with not only our internal team, but also other glass manufacturers around the world. So I thought it'd be a really good thing to pull some of the questions that were brought up on the pre-recorded video as well. And John could add some input that I think I'd probably top out at, to be honest with you.
Very good.
Right. I think, is that better? Are we all good?
Yeah.
Oh,
sounds good on our end.
Yeah.
Whew. Thanks for bearing with me there, guys. Sorry about that. Right, thank you for introducing yourselves. I really, really appreciate that. I'm not sure who's here that have watched the pre-recorded content already. There was some really, really good information in there. what is also worth noting as well is that Nolan and John weren't in the pre-recorded call. Okay, bear with me, sorry. Right. Apparently, what's happening is I can hear stuff, but apparently it's all right with you guys. Is that right? So
Sounds great.
up.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so it sounds good to you. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm putting it on mute from my end, so I can't really hear you very well. I'm going to ask you the questions and do a little thumbs up and down and a hand signal. Otherwise, I've got like a few different voices talking at the same time and it's going to go awry. So I'm going to try and do it this way and see if it works. So let's have a little look. We don't have any questions as yet. So let's have a little chat firstly with Nolan and with John about Allied Glass, because we're looking at environmentally sustainable packaging, and with the pre-recorded content we've seen a lot of views from people sourcing the packaging, and it'd be really interesting to get some points from people making the packaging. So are there any points you can give us with recent developments, anything new coming out, new ideas? If you get us started with that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, you'll be glad to hear there's lots and lots going on. It really is. It's as high up the agenda for Allied and the industry as it's ever been in all my time, and it's really becoming more and more important and sort of central to everything that we do. Some of the things that are worth knowing about glass in general, and Nolan mentioned the fact that we as Allied work across the world really with through various organisations, is we've got a head start with glass because it's 100% recyclable. You can recycle it time and time again without it losing any of its quality or its properties. So it's got lots of advantages over some of the other packaging materials, which is a great place to start. I think the other thing with glass is that the technology already exists to melt glass without using any carbon, because you can melt glass with 100% electricity. And these furnaces do exist, albeit on a small scale. So the exciting thing about it all is that our challenge really is just about scaling the technology that's already known and proven, making it economically viable, making it fit with what our end customers want to see in terms of how it competes against other materials, and bringing that online. So we've got a couple of key projects going on, which are both European projects that we're involved in. One of them is called Project 90. Project 90 is an EU-wide collaboration between all of the European glass manufacturers to bring all glass up to 90% recycled content by 2030. So we at Allied are already more than halfway there. We are a little bit ahead of certainly our premium manufacturing competitors in terms of the amount of recycling content that we use in our glass. But we are collaborating across Europe, and we're working with local authorities and governments who are designing schemes for collecting glass and taking glass from the consumer and from the household, and really upping the collection rates. As you can imagine, some countries are already a lot better than other countries. The UK sits somewhere around the middle with just over 70% of glass already collected. But that's increasing year on year. So Project 90 is really a key thing, and we're in a decent spot to get to that target in the next 10 years. One of the other projects that's worth talking about, I think, is that we are one of a number of companies, again across Europe, who are actually clubbing together to build what's being deemed the furnace of the future. And that's going to be built in a couple of years' time. It's going to be the first of its kind. It's a hybrid furnace where 80% of its power is going to come from renewable electricity. And that's going to be built in Germany in a couple of years' time. So that's us, along with some of our competitors, paying for a furnace to be built that won't produce any glass for us, but we will be part of that technical development. So we, along with the other guys, will learn about the furnace design, there'll be some snags with it, but we've all committed to invest a few tens of millions of pounds overall in the project, really to learn about how we get to that next stage towards net zero carbon. So yeah, a couple of pretty major projects actually that are going on a European level.
So I think it's a good time to kind of jump in about, and obviously I don't want this to be all about glass at all, but I think it kind of feeds in from what John touched on is that there's also an element of understanding what glass is made of, and there's not just one kind. So I know that Rosie on the pre-recorded conversation talked about recyclability and colored glass. I think you were talking about green glass, which you can get a really high recycled content in. I'm not going to say the percent because John knows this and I don't. I always seem to get it right. But I think the key is that you've essentially got three kinds of glass that you can buy. So what the majority of the spirits industry uses, especially within the emerging brands channel, is what we call premium flint or extra white. So that's 100% raw materials. So there's no recycled content going in it, but obviously, as John's pointed out, on the back end of it, it's 100% recyclable and can go back into the system. And then you have what we call standard flint, and the percentage in that varies. So for instance, with us as a business, we've gone up from 40 to 60% over the last couple of years, which is an incredible leap. And as John has pointed out, we'll continue to try to climb on that ladder. And then you've got, in the middle, you've got colored glass. And that's where you can, for darker colors, you can hide and increase your recyclable content. What's been traditionally driven by our commercial customers is, with recycled content, there's always been a hue to the glass, a greenish, bluish tint. It can vary day to day. And what we've done is, as an industry, is we've been able to push back that hue, so it's less noticeable in the glass. And what I'd probably argue as well is that consumers are a bit more open to it than they used to be. So there are three different levels of glass that we're all working towards. And every business has their own reasons why they want those different kinds of glass. I don't think there's any right answer. Each business and each product has to make the decision of what they actually want. Questions?
That's super interesting from my point of view, because I didn't actually know that. I knew there's bits and pieces to do with recyclability and stuff, but I think that's really important because people don't know about this stuff. I mean, I was banging on about packing peanuts, but actually they might be biodegradable, but I don't know because the person who's given me that packaging hasn't told me. So I think there's a lot around education as well, actually enabling the consumer to do the right thing by giving them the information they need, and whether it's the consumer or whether it's somebody making the purchase. I think we have a sort of a responsibility, if you like. So it's really interesting.
And I think all of us within the chain have the same responsibility. So, I think that consumers overall, and I account myself as a consumer day to day, you obviously want to feel better when you're buying something, and you kind of want your supplier to do the work for you. And I think that along that chain, I'd probably argue that we as a business and we as an industry have been pushing quicker than we ever have because our customers are asking for more things. And, there's certain items that you'll see in the market. So a great example that you had yesterday was around the packaging that bottles come in or something like that. And the only thing that's going to change that, or that change the mentality of who's supplying you that, is if you as a customer or your customers tell you that that's not right. And we have the same thing. I mean, we don't just, our glass bottles don't just come on a lorry full of glass bottles. They come in packaging as well that we've been pushed to better as well.
I think with packaging, everyone has to do their bit at every step of the way. So no matter how small you are, how big you are, if you can make changes that are more sustainable and environmentally friendly, then you should do it, just as a general, human being, really.
Fully agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think everyone does what they can, right? And I think, as a manufacturer, you just have that little bit more responsibility than a consumer to sort of go that extra mile. And you're seeing it a lot. So I think we're in a good place. I mean, you can always do more, right? But I think that we're in a positive place to be able to make those changes happen.
Well, because people are talking about it, and they are, you know, within the industry, you get, you know, smaller brands and bigger brands are trying to make what changes they can and what's available to them. And some of that is down to, you know, having the products available to be able to, you know, send your bottle in a, you know, in a flexi hex cardboard thing rather than a plastic pillow, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for you two as producers, do you get direct feedback, or have you seen an increase in feedback around packaging or the want, or is it just something that you are trying to better yourselves at on a daily basis?
Well, for us, we do want to try and better ourselves constantly, but we get fantastic feedback from that packaging. Everyone comments on it because it looks stunning as well, you know, and everyone goes, wow, I love the, you know, not getting plastic and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the feedback we've got is specifically around sort of like airbags and stuff like that, but they are actually recyclable. But as I sort of mentioned before, like the UK has what 35 plus different recycling schemes. So how do you possibly know which one does it? Are you going to go online? Are you going to check, or are you just going to put it in the bin because that's easier for you? I mean, you might feel a bit bad doing it, but yeah, you can't guarantee what the person's going to do, can you? So yeah. I think more and more people are looking for the fact that you're making an effort to do it, I think, at the bare minimum.
Yes, I agree. It's little changes where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose for me as well, learning more about how the recycling and reusability chain actually happens and where as well, because it's not necessarily particularly easy to find that information. You have to have good relationships with your suppliers and stuff like that to be able to actually understand how that happens.
Absolutely. I mean, we use, when we do events or markets or shows or things like that in the distant past, we don't use plastic tasting cups, for example. We use vegware, which they then, you know, it's biodegradable, but you do have to send it back to them or put it in an industrial composting type facility. Yeah. But it's little things like that, isn't it? Better than just single-use plastic, I suppose.
I mean, it's just for how it looks and feels as well. Like plastic feels horrible, right? Versus something which is sort of cardboard or like slightly rustic. Like it just feels nicer.
Yes.
You know?
So yeah, I think there's some interesting elements to it as well, and you know, so many of my customers are digging into this now, and it's what is actual recyclable and what it actually means. So I think a lot of people within their actual packaging will think something is recyclable when it's not. So on your point, Rosie, that even though you might in theory be able to recycle it, if the system and the infrastructure isn't in place, then currently it's not possible. And the one interesting thing is I think more and more people are becoming canny about that, which is really good.
Yeah, infrastructure, education, communication, those three things.
Good list of three.
I think the thing with people not knowing whether or not things are recyclable is another positive for glass, really, because from a glass packaging point of view, the main difference between the different glasses that are used for containers, whether they're bottles or jars, is only colour. And we can recycle any of that. Whereas if you think about plastics, the milk carton is very, very different to the PET bottle, which is very, very different to the plastic that's inside the Tetra Pak or something. So that's a bit of a nightmare for consumers. But even in glass, we're still on a very, very long education route, because back in the 1980s, we made the mistake of coming up with this brilliant way of collecting glass from consumers by inventing the bottle bank. But people assumed that you can't put a jar into a bottle bank because it's not a bottle. So we're still telling people that a jar is just like a bottle with a bigger hole at the top.
Oh dear.
It sounds really basic, but that's right to the point about educating and things like that. So within the UK, through our trade association, British Glass, we do something called Glass Guardians, where we go out and start talking to school kids about glass recycling and things like that. And they're great because primary school kids, their eyes open wide and they're interested in anything. And so we tell them about how you can recycle glass and what happens, and how you stop. If you make glass from raw materials, you dig sand out of a hole in the ground, but you can recycle all this glass. And that's the point where you've got to get people, I think.
Get them young. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, guys. So I've had to jump on. Bernie had a few technical issues, so I'm just going to throw in some questions, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So we've had Mr. Smith. He said, how easy is it to reduce the weight of glass bottles? I know some people who have reduced their weight by about 30%.
Yeah, so it depends on the container. What I probably argue that if you look within, the spirits industry as general, and the emerging brands craft industry especially, the whole trend was, when craft really kicked off within Europe about 8 years ago, was to go into a bright, heavy, thick base bottle, and it was across the board, and it's still happening. And I think the reality is, and we actually did some work on this with the Retail Institute a couple of years ago, is that the reality is that people aren't that bothered about it when it comes to your usual consumable brands. So when you start getting into your whiskeys or your rums that are over 80 quid, then yeah, it's that super premium feel. But the thick base isn't a massive thing. So when we then look to pull weight out of it, then yeah, there's a lot to go at. I think the further and further you go down the track, it's harder to do, but it is possible. I know that David touched on it in the pre-recorded video that I think he was talking about Gordon's have taken out a bunch of weight. And for the bigger guys, that is a normal process with brands, but it's now is much about sustainability. So before, when it was an argument that, well, if we take out some weight, it'll be less premium, it's actually a positive conversation piece. So you can take out weight. Now, John will know this better than me, but you can only go so far with taking out weight until the container doesn't become safe. But there is a big gap right now between your average spirit, which is in the craft channel, to how light you could take that bottle potentially.
Fantastic. And throw into another type of packaging, really. David again said, what can be done to get rid of these packaging peanuts? He said he's received 2 packages in as many days with them in, and I witnessed one of them. To be fair, he was an happy bunny. So I think it's a hate for everyone. And to be fair, they're not very good for the environment. And obviously, we need to try and find alternatives or better solutions to this.
I think David should get out his popcorn maker and start making some more popcorn packaging personally.
Do you know what? I'm not totally averse to that idea. We laughed about the whole popcorn thing, but pasta straws are fantastic. They're better than paper straws. I don't think that's the craziest idea in the world. Why not make them completely just biodegradable? I'm sure you could make packaging peanuts that were biodegradable. You could use them on your compost, whatever. Again, these things that we got with packing peanuts, they might be biodegradable, but because nobody's told us, they're going in the general waste. I think there's so much we can do. I just think they should. Stirrers are illegal, plastic straws are illegal, packing peanuts.
Absolutely. Well, you can shred cardboard. You can get shredded cardboard instead of packaging peanuts. I get a lot of things delivered in that, glasses I've had printed or whatever. I've got one company and they're brilliant. They don't send any of all of that plastic rubbish, and it's glassware they're sending. So it's really quite fragile. It's just all recycled cardboard that's been shredded.
Yeah, from a personal experience, the ADI doing judging, they don't allow packaging peanuts to be sent, so it's alternatives only, which is fantastic, because as you can imagine, when you're getting 1,000 bottles turn up and everyone's put packaging peanuts in there, it's a real waste and they're a real mess of a pain to clear up as well. So that's fantastic. So we got a question in from an anonymous person. Are there any collection schemes to get bottles back to the original manufacturer to maybe be reused or recycled?
Generally, bottles are designed either as reusable bottles or one-way bottles, and on the one-way containers, that's where there's generally been the trend towards going to a lighter weight. Bottle walls become thinner, so they're not designed to be rewashed, refilled, etc. but they are, of course, recyclable. So the majority of glass in the UK is designed for returning through the recycling system, generally through the curbside collection that the local authorities do.
So is it? Sorry, Karen.
You are seeing more and more sort of smaller things pop up. I mentioned it a couple of times, Loop, where you can send your containers back to them. They'll wash them all, send them back to the manufacturer. That's great, but I don't think there's enough of it at the moment. And you know that like there's obviously two streams. There's one way or come back, and I think reusing is a really interesting thing for the future. But again, the infrastructure is just not there for us to do it properly yet. But I think in time.
I think there's some great brand leaders with it as well. I know that the guys from Bullards are doing their refillable pouches. Boxer Gin does the same thing. I believe Victory in London is doing the same thing, and more people should start doing that. I think that, you know, in some ways, as a manufacturer of glass, we'd love to sell as many bottles as we can, but you know, we are working on, you know, back to the question about heavier bottles. We seem to be getting more and more interest in, can you develop a heavier bottle that could be used multiple times? You know, it's definitely something that's fantastic. You know, if it's going to add into what the solution is, then 100%.
So there's been a lot of people reusing their own bottles as well, I've noticed, putting fairy lights in. You can get the sort of toppers now that go in as well, and it seems to be like, if you've got a pretty bottle to begin with, people tend to want to keep it and reuse it. So maybe it's an edge that way with your bottles.
Well, that's it. And there's people, you know, small businesses that will turn bottles into candles and things like that. So, you know, we give ours to a local small business, and then they're making something out of a bottle that, instead of it going into recycling.
Fantastic.
It's actually quite incredible because, you know, if you look on eBay, a lot of these bottles that don't cost that much to make, you know, people are buying for 10, 15 quid empty. So if you do it right, you know, there's a market in that as well.
So we've got a question here from Pat. He says, has there been an increasing interest in natural packaging materials such as sheet wool?
I'm not sure what that is.
Sheep wool, did you say?
Wool.
Oh, sheep wool. Oh.
Yeah.
It's not something I'm familiar with personally. I'm not entirely sure it would work across with everyone. I'm thinking it's probably not vegan friendly.
It's also tends to be in chilled packaging. So if you get, you know, a restaurant delivery or food delivery, chilled food, they tend to use that kind of packaging, I think, to keep things cool.
I think one of the other things that people maybe don't fully know, and it's another communication failing or opportunity, whichever way you look at it, is when we come back to glass, is the fact that net zero for manufacturing the type of packaging that we're already using day in, day out is on the agenda and is achievable. You know, so whereas some of the on-the-go plastics are clearly a problem, clearly need an alternative finding, I don't think it's the case that everything that we use now as packaging won't be seen in 20 years, because I don't think that's the case with glass packaging, because the carbon-free route is there on the horizon and being worked on at all levels, really. And maybe not everybody sees that. You know, I work on stuff like that every week, and sometimes assume that people sit in the pub talking about that, but maybe they're not all as sad as some of us are. But
I do, John. I do.
Yeah.
So someone else has sort of suggested perhaps we should all tell consumers what the bottles actually cost. I mean, how do you guys feel about that?
Listen, I think you know, everything costs money. You know, everything within the process costs money, and I think that, you know, if you think about your packaging as a whole, you want it to look as premium as possible. I mean, I'd even argue that businesses like Kings County and Brooklyn that have probably the most plain packaging you could ever imagine have some of the coolest packaging. I don't think there's an issue with it. I think consumers kind of pick it up, but I think a lot of that kind of comes into your packaging design and showing that you have the value from your packaging, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Fantastic. So Nevin said, is there a biodegradable sealing solution instead of PVC?
There is. There's a company called Viscous Closures, and they do one that goes over the top of the bottle, and yeah, it's biodegradable. It's just quite expensive to set yourself up with it, that's all. And they're slimy and they're pretty gross to put on, but they work brilliantly.
There's also some other alternatives as well that are being developed in the market. So there's a company up in Scotland called Gwala, and they are, well, they're not working. They have developed essentially it's like a cork closure, but then it's got a screw on it as well, so it clicks. So it blocks you, in theory, from your leakages and vacuity issues that you would have. So that then takes you away from having to have having a seal on it at all, in theory.
The alternative to using a plastic shrink seal as well, you've also got foil, which is recyclable, and you can use paper labels as well, like, and stick it over the top. That acts as a pilfer-proof anti-theft thing as well. So there's options. You know, you don't always have to use PVC.
And I think on that point, a lot of it has to do with the accountability. So why a lot of people are putting on PVC shrink wraps is so the corks don't pop out. And you know, there is a very good argument that, and this falls under us as well, is that if the glass manufacturer and the cork manufacturer are within spec and they're working to the right specs, then your cork shouldn't be popping out and you shouldn't have leakers. Full and stop. Because that's what we are held accountable as a business to do on a daily basis.
Fantastic. So we've had another question in that said, what would you say is the biggest challenge when it comes to sustainability within alcohol packaging?
That's a massive question, right? Personally, it's so broad because you're going from tiny little distillers to the huge massive brands. So I don't know, it could be with the big brands. I would say probably more likely to be something like distribution. Well, I know that's not specifically packaging, is it actually? I don't know.
But I think, Rosie, on your point, I think you're right. I think the biggest, if all of us were to take a long, hard look at it, it would be the carbon footprint of your packaging traveling to you. So, you know, and that accounts for us as well. You know, so you know, as much as we're making bottles in the UK, you know, what are we shipping in to make those bottles? Where are we getting our packaging from? You know, the reality is that if you want a cork closure, that has to come from Portugal, or the lion's share will be coming from Portugal. You know, there's certain things that you have to have a long, hard think, and it's not just, you know, that you're buying your products from someone that does in the UK. It's where they're getting those products to make those as well, if we're really going to dig into it.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing as well is, you know, you in terms of secondary packaging as well, you've got two. Generally, like I would say there's two main options, right? There's produce in EU, UK, which is generally much more expensive, but quicker and easier, or produce in China, much cheaper. Obviously, you've got massive differences and payoffs depending on which one you go for. But you might actually find that actually it's worthwhile just producing in the UK. You reduce your carbon footprint. You don't have to get as many produced. You know, you don't have to deal with those massive containers. And it's a balance, right? It's about working out what you're going to get the best value and in and out of, I guess.
Fantastic. So Cooper King Distillery, I think we kind of touched on it before, but they said, do you have any experience or thoughts on the viscering tamper-proof seals made from extruded cellulose?
They're the ones I mentioned before.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who has a gym brand, she uses them. They work really well on her bottles because the neck is quite long. They're quite tricky to learn how to put on, but they're great. You know, but again, it comes down to communication. You have to tell your customers that is not plastic. It, you know, it can go into the food waste. It, you know, that kind of thing.
Fantastic. So we've run out of questions. So if there's anything else you guys really want to touch on, or if anyone else wants to raise any more questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them, of course. But yeah, if you guys have got anything more you want to touch on, I think when I arrived, you were deep in conversation. So it's the floor is yours, really.
Not the pressure.
Yeah, I was going to say, they all rush at once.
Yeah, thanks. I'm okay, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's everything for now then. So thanks guys for watching, and thank you guys for spending your time today with us talking about the environment and the packaging.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
everyone.
guys.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.